Chapter 31 Sound in the Moonlight. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Noel.n. In the long street, Ghost Hand was silently smoking his pipe. Although the air was filled with cheers and laughter, the atmosphere around the bench was destitute, like the winter. A homeless man was shivering on the ground. "Excuse me, how do I get to Luther Street?" someone behind Ghost Hand asked. It sounded like the person was lost and had been asking everyone nearby for directions. Then finally he came to ask Ghost Hand. Irritated, Ghost Hand did not show a temper, but was also not interested in turning around to answer the question. He silently continued to smoke his pipe, then pointed to the right. "Oh, thank you." The pedestrian got their answer, and happily left. The smashing sound continued until the group of people had completely searched through the hotel from attic to cellar. But they still did not find where the white-haired boy and his dog were hiding. Finally, Ghost Hand went inside the hotel, looked at the ruins of the front desk, his eyes gloomy. "Did they say anything?" "I swear he is not here. He is not here anymore." The wife of the hotel owner, who had been tied up and slapped around a few times, choked as she sobbed. "He left half an hour ago. You came too late. I really do not know anything, nothing. So we missed him again." Ghost Hand put down his pipe, and knocked off some ash on the wall. His voice was cold. "So you are saying, that we just missed that D*MN kid again?" The homeless guy who had wanted to escape had his leg broken. "He came into the ruins of the hotel." "Sir, it had nothing to do with me. I did not expect that." "I swear." The homeless guy begged, "Let me go. I was truthful to Mr. Shaman, and I really did not." Ghost Hand put down his pipe, and sneered at the homeless guy on the floor. The homeless man's voice became lower and lower, finally, his whispers had no sound. His eyes full of despair. "I do know that this was just a little mistake. You should not be blamed." Ghost Hand bent down, and pressed on the right eye of the homeless guy. His cloudy eyes were full of sorrow, "But unfortunately, I'm not like the Scotland Yard. They're too understanding." There was a sickening snapping sound. Something broke. "Thought of everything, but I still missed two things." On the streets, dragging an old suitcase, Xuanhuan was murmuring despondently, "First, I did not account for the hands. On examination, and second, I did not think." Yi put his head down and stared at the crystal ball in his hands, whining, "Why is this ether ball so expensive?" In the hands of Xuanhuan, the fist-sized crystal ball was flashing with the reflections of the street lights. With the hustle and bustle of the people nearby, the crystal ball sometimes flashed erratically. It was like broken silver. Dust was constantly reborn, disappearing and converging inside the crystal. It would make you dizzy after a while. This was one of the most commonly used measurement tools for musicians. The ether ball. It looked like a solid crystal ball, although it was just a thin layer of crystal solidified by a high temperature. The refractive index and thickness were of the highest standard. The inside was engraved with runes, filled with pure ether, and was able to respond to the lowest sound. The one in Ye's hands was bought from a store for civilian use, or for musician apprentices to play with. It was the most basic type. It would last for about 4 months, but it had cost almost all of Xuanhuan's money. It was said that in the army, and in the musicians' union, there were much better quality ether balls and measuring tools. They were not things money could buy. As for learning how to communicate with the ether, the most suitable material for the introductory lesson was in his hands. He rubbed the notebook that Wolf Flute had given him, and sighed softly. Even though he had the ether ball in his hands, the difficulty level was still very high. So far, musicians were still rare in the human world. Every book said that in order to communicate with the ether, musicians needed to recite the runes. The runes of the notes were the basis of all music sheets and power. They came from the exploration and research from past years. They were composed of complex basic syllables, hard to understand, and difficult to recite. More than half of them were the sounds of the world converted by ether. From runes to a measure, and from a measure to a movement, it finally became a complete music score in the end. From their long exploration, mankind had developed a complete system divided into 7 branches and hundreds of specialization. In wolf flute's notes, only 3 basic notes had been recorded, which were the basis of 3 different schools. They were the extraction of the school of modifications, the peace of the school of abstinence, and the beastly nature of the school of summoning. As long as you could master any of them, you would be able to pass the test. However, Yi Qingxian had no confidence in learning how to complete this seemingly simple test within 10 days. Especially since this was Avalon. In order to avoid the large-scale chaos of ether caused by loud noises, the city was completely surrounded by the enchantment of ether. This enchantment was like a griddle, able to completely suppress ether interference caused by 90.9% of the noise, and only the most accurate syllables could work. After all, not many ordinary people dared to have anything to do with ether. Most were rather afraid of it. Whether it was the notes of wolf flute, or of any musician, the covers of their musical sheets would always have a commandment from the first pope. The commandment, written in black ink, had been engraved in everyone's heart, from birth until death, never forgotten. Awe of ether. Having studied the history of the church, Yi Qingxian was able to have a more comprehensive understanding of the current world. After all, for mankind, 90% of the world was undeveloped dark areas. Researchers around the world would uniformly use 4 colors while marking maps. The most central regions were white, representing the density of ether, and how much land could be occupied by man on a large scale. Yellow represented where extreme loud noises were banned. And black was the danger zone outside of the border. In the black areas, even the slightest cough would cause a chain reaction as dangerous as avalanche. In the red bordering towns, shouting was not even allowed. People could only whisper. The red was known as the silence zone. Those who had not been to the border and beyond could not understand that kind of suffering and fear. Although the Dark Ages had ended only 300 years ago, the riots caused by ether destroyed numerous cities and villages. Nowadays, catastrophes had become a nightmare inside the heart of every human. Thus the areas where humans lived would inevitably have churches, not only for spiritual beliefs, but also because during the constructions of the churches, a special technology was used to dilute the density of ether, to ensure security within the area. Because the musicians controlled the means to communicate with, and control ether, they were respected and feared. In order to develop and advance their skills, musicians had also paid a large price. It was said that 100 years ago, in order to communicate easily with ether, all schools had chosen to establish academies at the border. However, the death and accident rates were too high. Some schools had gradually migrated back to the inland so that at least then students would not have their head busted open due to a wrong syllable read, or half of their body cut off by a vortex of ether. From ancient times until now, becoming a musician had been a dangerous business, and the difficulty to enter was also second to none. Yi Qingxian was thinking, 10 days to learn a rune, isn't that a little too difficult to do? It was late at night on Luther Street, on an empty public carriage platform. It had been years, but it was just how Yi Qingxian had remembered. Once night fell, there would be few pedestrians, but the lights were bright, and there also a bench to lie down on. The summer night temperatures would not freeze anyone, and the wind was still tolerable. This was Midtown, so it was pretty safe. As long as you did not look like a bum, the police would not drive you away. Instead of sharing rotten shacks with the beggars, this was a good place to stay on the streets. It was easy for Yi to read the notes. Although he had memorized the contents of the notes on the way to London, he still wanted to read through them one more time. The extraction of the school of modifications had been the first that Yi eliminated as a possibility to learn the level of sensitivity required to handle to ether was too high. With Yi Qingxian as unaware as a blind man, even if he was successful, he would only be turned into a mummy by the uncontrollable runes. The beastly nature from the school of the summoning had the clearest notes in the book but sounded like a beast roaring when recited. The 6 basic syllables simply could not be connected together, and Yi Qingxian just could not grasp the emphasis. That piece from the school of abstinence seemed to be the easiest to learn, but there were dozens of basic syllables. Therefore, the difficulty level of entering the school of abstinence was the highest among all the 7 schools. Yi Qingxian really had no confidence in his own talent. With no choice, he had to try one by one. First, take a deep breath. Yi Qingxian sat on the bench, chewing on the last bit of dry food. Under the streetlight, he read the book, relax the throat muscles, feel the lung expanding, and then slowly exhale, tongue slightly touch the teeth. According to these little tricks in the book, he tried the syllable, sigh, but felt like someone was stabbing him. Of course, the ether ball did not respond. He smacked his lips, feeling like something was wrong. The young man tried again with hope. This time he did not feel like he was being stabbed, but like a group of ducks quacking together. The ball still had no reaction. Yi Qingxian took a deep breath and comforted himself, must be because I'm not sincere. Sincere, sincere, and concentrate. Old Phil was lying on the bench, leering at the idiot, then soon looked away and continued sleeping. Oh, no, it is not right. Yi murmured to himself. Yeah, oh. Still no reaction. Oh. In this long summer night, Yi Qingxian had wasted a full 3 hours only to realize that perhaps this syllable just did not agree with him. Perhaps another syllable would be better. But the ether ball had proved him wrong with more silence. Another syllable would not make a difference. Oh. Despite Yi Qingxuan's various attempts, the ether ball still had no response. In the end, with a sore throat, Yi Qingxian could not help throwing the book on the ground. What's the matter? What is wrong? Yi Qingxian glared at the ether ball, but no matter how hard he stared, the crystal ball remained still, with no response at all. Is it broken? He shook it, want to be sure, and at that moment, the ether ball lit up. Okay. Like the light of fireflies, the ether ball started flashing vaguely then and extinguished, like silver dust was floating in the liquid. Then numerous flashes appeared like stars, flashing in rotation with no specific pattern, illuminating Yi Qingxuan's stunned face. What is this? He looked in surprise at his surroundings, and a strange smell came through the wind. A faint laughter came from afar. Something was coming. Chapter 32 I've started practicing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hee, come chase me. It was as if a psycho was screaming while playing a game. In the deep night, some people crazily ran over, squirming strangely on the moonlit street. Yi Qingxian swore that he had never seen a sight so hectic before in his entire 17 years. Under the silver moonlight, a man with a hair like a bird's nest laughed maniacally. His butt was shaking as he raced down the street. A breeze blew by in the night, lifting the thin shirt on his body, revealing a pair of bold underwear. As he ran barefoot, the ether ball would flash in accordance with his laughter. Ho ho! His laughter was like a broken drum roll littered onto the ground. He continued running around like a psycho. Yi Qingxian gaped at the ether ball, this works too. Before he could even finish his question, the crazy bird nest guy was back with his high-pitched laughter, scaring Yi Qingxian. He raced in the wind, stopping without warning in front of the youth. Bending down, he pointed at his bruised face, radiating the smell of alcohol. You. Tell me. With a face of seriousness, he asked, am I hot? His voice was deep but clear, gentle with just a tinge of roughness. It could be described as a nice voice, but Yi Qingxian was still stuck on the image of him running nude and could not reply. The ether ball in his hand continued to flash. Do you think I'm hot? The nude man asked again. Yes. Yi Qingxian complimented the man against his conscience, very, very hot. He felt like his conscience had shattered into a million pieces after replying. But if one looked carefully, it was clear that if the man had not been beat up earlier, he would be pretty attractive. He seemed pretty young too. Haha, of course. The drunken man let out a thigh-slapping laugh. When a breeze blew past, he fell cleanly onto the floor and passed out. Only Yi Qingxian was rooted in the wind. "Hey, are you okay?" He kicked the young man, but there was no response. After a long time, Yi Qingxian was finally able to breathe easily. Settling into a chair, he decided to ignore everything and continue practicing scales. La 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 la. The nude man on the floor suddenly flipped over, let out a disgusting drunken burp, and started singing while slapping his stomach. There was rain tonight. Whoosh, and all the flowers fell to the ground. Ah, but what's the matter? We're happily together. He paused with the last note. Unsatisfied, he added another sentence. We're happily together. Who would want to be with you? Yi Qingxian thought to himself. The ether ball in his hand was as bright and happy as a dog that had seen a sausage. Yi Qingxian felt like he was going crazy. What was going on? Was the crazy man's voice communicating with ether? Suddenly the naked man scrambled onto his feet and grabbed Yi Qingxuan's hand. The man forced his eyes open, but his vision was blurry and he could not see anything. Yi Qingxian was shocked. Kid, don't be scared. The most important thing for a family is to be organized. With brother here, no one will beat you up. Still holding Yi Qingxuan's hand, he cried hoarsely, what's the most precious thing in the world? It's love. It's love. Doesn't brother's love make you feel warm inside? Yes, warm. Yi Qingxian nodded against his conscience. Ahaha, the nude man laughed dumbly. And then he bent over and puked his guts out. But even as this psycho was throwing up, Yi Qingxuan's ether ball was still shining. What is this? Close to tears, Yi Qingxian took out his ether ball. I was just practicing my chants. What did I do wrong? Nothing happened except attracting this crazy thing. Nothing happened. Do you want to know why? The nude man finished vomiting and stood up on his wobbly legs, wiping the saliva from the corner of his mouth. Yi Qingxian nodded lifelessly. Immediately, the man pointed his finger at the tip of Yi Qingxuan's nose. The nude man yelled seriously, just give up. You can't sense the ether. As Yi Qingxian was trying to make sense of those words, the man grabbed the small pamphlet in Yi Qingxuan's hands. Pointing at a standard syllable, he said, an extractions range goes up to E2. High notes. You can't sing up there. Choose another, choose this one. He flipped through the pages like the drunkard he was. When he saw the messy notations of wolf flute, his eyes brightened. Practice this one. This one. Do you understand? This is the best for you. Yi Qingxuan's mind was blank. Glancing at the messy scrawls, he did not know what to think. It seemed to be the notes that wolf flute took during his father's class, but even he did not know what he wrote. How could ye practice it? Remember. The voice is just an appearance. The nude man held down Yi Qingxuan's shoulder. His hoarse voice suddenly became serious and cold, like transient thunder in the clouds. Ether is the controller of all, but it is also the servant of will. Before Yi Qingxian could react, he started singing once again and ran off as the ether balls continued to glow. He came like wind and he left like wind, only leaving behind a pile of vomit. After a long time, Yi Qingxian finally processed everything that had just happened. Furious, he shouted, "You psycho! Give me back my book!" But the only reply was a faint ho-ho echoing in the night sky from an obnoxious idiot. The next day, Yi Qingxian woke early in the morning to the sound of his alarm. His throat felt like he had swallowed charcoal. It was a pain that threatened to tear him apart. He had practiced the entire night, using only his memory. But the only result was that his vocal cords were swollen and he could not even say a complete sentence, and he was starving. With a long face, he pulled out his wallet. All he had left were a couple of tens. This was half a month's salary in loot. But in Avalon, with its high living costs, this bit of money could barely last him 3 to 4 days. But 10 days. He couldn't even imagine it. Must I revert to my old lifestyle and beg? He mumbled to himself, his throat burning, I can't even find a faucet in Avalon. As soon as he uttered those words, a bottle of milk appeared by his side. Old Phil strolled back leisurely, half a wheat cake hanging from its mouth. It generously split its bounty with its top follower. Seeing that old Phil had not forgotten him after finding food, Yi Qingxian was touched to the point of tears. But there was not any time to cry now. Everything could wait until he was full. After devouring the bottle of milk and half a wheat cake, Yi Qingxian patted his stomach. It had been empty the entire night, and it was still grumbling. He was still a bit hungry. Old Phil yawned and ran off from the chair after hitting Yi in the face with his tail. After a bit, he reappeared with a new bottle of milk and wheat cake. Old Phil pushed it towards Yi Qingxian with his paw, as if saying, hurry and eat. There's more if it's not enough. Where do you get all this? Yi Qingxian picked up old Phil and flipped him around, searching. Was there a hidden treasure chest inside of him? A little pissed, old Phil bit down and slapped him with its tail. He jumped off the chair and motioned for Yi to follow. Although it was early in the morning, many stores were already open. The amount of people multiplied gradually as well. Few people paid attention to the white-haired boy and old golden dog running through the streets. Taking twists and turns, and going through 2 alleys filled with trash, they arrived at a small alley. It seemed to be the back door of a store. Old Phil ran to a small drawer beside the back door. Jumping, it opened the drawer with its mouth. Proud, it turned towards Yi Qingxian to show off the milk it had brought back. Ah, I knew you stole it. Facial muscles twitching, Yi Qingxian stared at the drawer that was almost empty, thanks to old Phil. Old Phil barked, filled with pride. Stop barking. Yi Qingxian hurriedly put a hand over old Phil's mouth. Didn't I tell you to stop stealing? We still have some money left. What if they find out and beat you up? Before he could finish, a voice sounded behind him, rooting Yi to his spot. Oh, so it's your dog. A giant shadow fell over him. In the shadow, Yi Qingxian turned around with difficulty. He stayed silent. A hulking man lowered his head and said in a cold voice, it's not even noon and it already came 3 times. The man looked a bit old. He was probably around 40 years old with salt and pepper hair, but his body was terrifyingly burly. His pectoral muscles seemed ready to burst from his shirt, and his arm was thicker than Yi Qingxuan's thigh. He was around 2 meters tall and his body 2 meters wide. He was a monster. The scariest was the iron poker in his hands. The red-hot poker was covered in charcoal dust, as if it was fresh out of the oven. Yes, it was probably enough to kill 10 thieves and their dogs. Please let me explain. Yi Qingxian shoved old Phil and forced out a smile. I'm really sorry. The dog is a little pesky. I'll pay you back for the milk, but please don't get angry at him. The monstrous man stared at him. Expressionlessly, he rotated his neck. The color from Yi Qingxuan's face drained at the sound of his bones cracking. Behind him, old Phil suddenly started yowling, making him want to cry out, Old Phil, it's not the time to cause trouble. Yeah, we shouldn't be cowards. But this guy's arm is thicker than both our waists put together. Can't you just shut up? I gave it the milk, the man said. What? In Yi Qingxuan's opinion, today had been a little weird. Where else do you think it got the bread? The old man threw away his poker and bent down, waving at old Phil. The dog ran over, circled the man twice and raised his paw for a greeting. When old Phil turned back towards Yi Qingxian, its eyes were full of pride. In this awkward silence, Yi Qingxuan's stomach growled. The teen awkwardly looked to the side. The monstrous man stood up and studied both the boy and the dog. Nodding slightly, he pushed open the back door. I made some soup. Come in. Yi Qingxian never thought that there would be such a large watch shop on this busy and congested business street. Amidst the gentle tick-tock-tocks, countless clocks and watches stood in every corner. There was a vintage clock 2 meters high, a complicated clock hanging from the wall, a pocket watch laid across the counter. These clocks and watches took up 2/3 of the store. The sound of hundreds of ticking minute hands hovered around the store, creating a type of serenity. Holding a rag, Yi Qingxian wiped away every speck of dust in the window facing the street. Stepping back, he admired his work. He was not a freeloader. Sir, I'm done, Yi reported. The monstrous man at the front counter looked up from the thin book he was reading. Are you here for the exam? He put down his book. Emotionless, he asked, how did things turn into this? You can't even take care of your dog. Old Phil barked in reply while sitting on the cushion. You think too highly of me. I'm not taking care of him. He's the one taking care of me, Yi Qingxian muttered. What a good dog. The man stood up and knelt before the sleeping dog, carefully smoothing down his messy fur. Burly as he was, his movements were gentle. His eyes were no longer numb either, but had a tinge of warmth and care. It looks just like my old dog. I dreamed of it last night, and when I saw this guy this morning, I thought it was back. He paused for a bit, then suddenly asked, will you sell? No. Yi Qingxian shook his head without hesitation. You really need money, right? I can always think of something for money. Yi Qingxian chuckled awkwardly. If it comes to it, I can do some odd jobs. Whatever I do, I'll have enough for food. The monstrous man shook his head. Walking over, he lowered his head, looming over Yi Qingxian. His size had an ineffable pressure. Give me your hand, he ordered. Yi Qingxian stretched out both hands. The man studied and smelled them. His pupils constricted like a beast, sending chills down Yi Qingxuan's spine. Never held a sword and never touched blood. You're a good person. Letting go, the man shook his head coldly. In Avalon, it's the hardest for people like you. Where do you think you can go? Most stores won't accept unknown men. You can't even be a good thief in downtown. When you die, people will probably just sell your dog. He had aired out all of Yi Qingxuan's insecurities. There's gotta be a solution, right? Yi Qingxian asked nervously. Your hands have calluses from copying. Can you read and write? The man asked. Yes. Yi Qingxian replied honestly, I can read and write the lingua franca, runes, Eastern characters, and the Asgard language. Then go and clean up the attic. Ha! The last worker got sent to the hospital, and we're missing an accountant right now. There's no money, but I can give you breakfast and dinner. Get out after 10, got it? The man continued coldly, also, I don't like to be annoyed, so don't do extra things. Any problems? No, no. Free meals are okay. Free meals are great. Yi Qingxian could not help but start laughing, and rubbed his hands together in pure joy. Then don't just stand there. Get to work. The man's features were still cold, but he seemed a little awkward as he continued, as if a bit embarrassed. After opening and closing his mouth, he finally raised the thin and tattered book. Pointing at the cover, he said, You. Teach me how to read. Yi Qingxian glanced at the cover and his jaw dropped. Anglo Fairy Tale Collection. Chapter 33 Getting Worried Slowly. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sir, How much is this clock? Don't know. I want this pocket watch, wondering. I do not know, did you not hear that? Sir, I think. Get out, we are closed. After turning away the sixth guest, the beastly man had Yi Qingxian close the door coldly, and put on the business closed sign, then continued to stay behind the front desk, and began to recite the alphabet with a stutter. Next to him, Yi Qingxian watched the customer that had been scared away and shook his head with a sigh. How did this store survive until now? Yi thought to himself. He was very curious, really. After he stayed in the store for 2 days, Yi Qingxian had gained a better understanding of the situation. The beastly man's name was Seaton. He was not the owner of this place, he was not even interested in clocks or watches. Other than finding someone to clean up the store, he did not bother to maintain it, just leaving everything as it was. Doing business was just bullshit. According to him, the owner of the store was neglecting his duty. He was traveling abroad, so Seaton was only asked to watch over the store while he was gone. Speaking of this, he was quite agitated. His face was so gloomy that he looked like he wanted to tear the real owner apart. His whole body gave off a violent aura. He would have scared away any children walking down the street. Yi Qingxian completely understood why the owner asked Seaton to watch the store. With such a fierce warrior here, not even an army would dare coming in without at least 2 companies of troops, not to mention thieves. In addition to spelling and reciting the alphabet, Seaton did not usually talk much. He usually said about 3 sentences a day, 2 of them were for old Phil. Yi Qingxian was not sure why Seaton was so interested in reading. All day long he was obsessed with a fairy tale book. He had asked Yi Qingxian to do the bookkeeping, which was really just teaching Seaton how to spell and read. Occasionally he would make Yi be a janitor as well. Yi Qingxian was happy to have more free time. He would squat at the doorstep muttering runes, and reciting syllables. Unfortunately, he had made very little progress. Very little progress was actually an exaggeration, it was really more like no progress at all. After a while, he started to feel distressed. After all, the resonance rate between himself and the ether was way too low. He felt the despair every time he remembered the psycho that was running naked on the street that night. That psycho could make the ether ball light up when he was vomiting. Why did Yi not have any skill despite practicing every day? But in fact, Yi did know the real problem. Sense the damn ether, sense, he would say to himself. He could not sense any ether. The standard syllable was so strict that the rate of breathing, as well as the number of vocal cord movements had to be precise. Even if everything was done according to the rules, you might not necessarily be successful. But if it was not done according to the rules, success would be absolutely impossible. Without adjusting oneself by sensing the change in ether, it was just taking a shot in the dark. But with such a long contact period, and tens of thousands of recitations, even a shot in the dark would have hit the target a few times by now. But somehow, Yi Qingxian had never once been successful. What is the matter, huh? He lay on the ground in frustration, wishing he could roll around like old Phil. Hey, Yi, go pick up the merchandise. Behind the counter, Seaton said, 18, Queen Boulevard, just find the manager there. The boss had placed an order there. Seaton put a pen in Ye's pocket, just sign. The goods are expensive, worth 10 of you, so do not steal anything or I will personally send you to the hospital. Seaton had spoken bluntly more than once or twice. It was rare to see someone as simple and straightforward as he was. Seaton hated hypocrisy, and believed in being straightforward. If he said the goods were very expensive, then they must be very expensive. If he said he would send Yi Qingxian to a hospital, he would send Yi Qingxian to the hospital. In this era, watches and clocks were still considered luxury goods. Large clocks and pocket watches had been things only the nobles could use. Additionally, everything in the store looked like a work of art with a great history. Some items even had patterns carved using enamel, and small pieces of precious stones. They seemed to be worth a lot of money. Any pocket watch was probably not worth 10 children, but definitely worth 8. Uncle, this is my 3rd day at work. You want me pick up such an important item? Is that a good idea? Yi Qingxian asked helplessly. You've got a point, but if you do not work, why am I keeping you here? Seaton sneered at him. Yi Qingxian hesitated, standing in place. What? Don't know your way? I do know a little. Yi Qingxian organized the words. I heard that that's an area for nobles, and nobles like to beat up people. What if they hit me? Those kinds of nobles are already extinct in Anglo. Now the gentlemen are in style, and they may even give you $2 out of pity, said Seaton coldly. Do not try to be lazy. It's not quite safe to go from here, there may be trouble on the way. This store is on the list with the Avalon police station, and the owner is also in touch with the parliament. Just say the name of the store and no one will give you trouble. I'm not feeling very well today. The way Seaton looked at him, Yi Qingxian could not speak anymore. Seaton put down his book, and asked bluntly, have you stolen somewhere? No. Did you offend anyone there? No. Yi Qingxuan's face turned bitter. Then why are you still here? Seaton sneered at him, lifting his hammer-like fist, do you want me to walk you out? I'm leaving now. Yi Qingxian went running. Sign on this sheet. Outside of the grand hall, the housekeeper, an old man in a black suite, pointed to the sheet. The old housekeeper had seemed very surprised by Yi Qingxuan's arrival. Even after Yi had signed, the housekeeper was still looking at him and shaking his head. What's wrong? Yi Qingxian checked himself, I have a dirty spot somewhere. No. The housekeeper stroked his beard, and suddenly asked, it must not be easy working for Seaton. Well, it's all right. Uncle is a good guy. He seems to be fond of you. The old man patted his shoulder. Using a wary tone he said, the future of young people is always infinite. He did not know why, but Yi Qingxian had a feeling that he was being trained in hell. Under the afternoon's burning sun, Yi Qingxian walked along the busy streets, feeling a little tired. Avalon was built on an island. The buildings were complex and dense, leaving no empty space. Even the 16 suburbs on the smaller islands were all occupied. The city hall divided Avalon into uptown, midtown, and downtown. These 3 divisions were subdivided into 9 ring areas. Queens Boulevard was the most beautiful place among all of the ring areas. The famous area was located in the center of the 3rd ring, Avalon's Golden Area. 30% of the entire population in Avalon worked to serve the people of this street. Silk and spices from the East, golden jewelry from India, fashion from the Burgundy Empire could be seen everywhere. People would feel dizzy just being exposed to it all. Yi Qingxian felt a burst of strange familiarity. It had been many years, and things had changed so fast, like the popular trends between the nobles was no longer the same, however, everything was still unchanged in its heart. It was like a charming, attractive woman, but with a cold heart. This feeling was enough to bring back many painful memories, making him feel unconformable from the bottom of his heart. He no longer wanted to stick around. But when he thought of himself, he could not help but sigh, such bad luck. He took out the ether ball from his pocket, played with it, looked at its silence, and thought that he might never figure this thing out in this lifetime. How come you don't glow? He lifted it up to the sun, looking at its almost transparent material, feeling quite discouraged. Young master. Someone softly asked behind him. Yi Qingxuan's body stiffened a bit. He felt a kind of familiar sense of suffocation coming back, making his face turn dreadful. He took a deep breath and looked back. In the crowded street, he saw an old woman with a basket, wearing a servant's clothes. She was like a normal old woman, moving slowly, her eyes blurry. Once she saw the kid look back, she was shocked. Her basket fell to the ground, melons rolled all over the place. She seemed to have seen something incredible. "Is that you, young master? Are you back?" She caught Yi Qingxuan's hand, excited and spoke incoherently, "You finally came back. If the master knew he would." "I'm sorry, you got the wrong person." The old maid was stunned. She stared at Yi Qingxian surprised and speechless. "I am not a young master. You must be confused." Yi Qingxian bent over to help her pick up her fruits and vegetables on the floor, and put them in her hands. "I have to go, please do not waste my time." The old maid looked at Yi Qingxian, disappointed. She bowed her head, sorry. She did not say any more. She held the basket and limped away. At times, she would look back at the boy, seeming very lost and sad. It was not until much later that Yi Qingxian was no longer able to see her in the crowd. Was everything all right?" Seaton asked as Yi Qingxian returned to the store. "Yep." Yi Qingxian smiled, "Saw some things. I suddenly realized Avalon was really scary sometimes. You never know if you'll run into something you don't want to see. If you do not want to go out, you can watch the shop." "That's all right." Yi Qingxian shook his head, "At first I just thought it'd be too much trouble to go out, but now, it doesn't seem so bad." "Oh, it's good that you got used to it. Where is old Phil? Have you seen him? It went out by itself. It seemed to have lost something." "Ah." Yi Qingxian thought of something, his expression became strange. Did old Phil go to pick up some strange stuff again? He could not help but wonder. Yi Qingxuan's worries were proven correct again. Late that night, Yi Qingxian was awoken by old Phil's barking at the back door. He yawned and got up to open the door. He sighed again. Had old Phil restored its bad habit? In the past, it had also been like this. It had always run around at night, bringing back a variety of strange things such as dead mice, dead rabbits, dead snakes, other people's kids' toys, or coins and pocket change on the ground. Not to mention, since old Phil had developed this habit, Yi Qingxuan's pocket was fuller than ever. But the bad thing was that what old Phil decided to bring back was completely unpredictable. Just like those mysterious little jars sold by the Indians, you never knew what was hidden inside. Old Phil barked, sounding even more anxious. Yi Qingxian felt a sense of helplessness and unlocked the bolt. Do not worry, I'm opening the door for you. Come, let me see what you got. **CK. Outside the door, old Phil was squatting on the ground, proudly sticking out his tongue. Yi Qingxian was petrified. Chapter 34 Save Me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After all these years, whether it was before or after returning, Yi Qingxian always felt that Avalon was a crazy place. One could run into anything, such as pests that one would not want to encounter, like that nude man running at midnight. But what had happened today was really testing the limit. It was not that he could not take a lot of pressure, but that old Phil's level of intensity was too high. Throughout these years, old Phil had brought back money, dingy lanterns, unopened bottles, copper cups stained with unknown substances, old rings, tattered books of foreign languages, a pot with a hole, jewelry that would cause hallucinations. Yi Qingxian had just assumed that old Phil had a wide range of interests, and then would throw it all out. But this time, he brought back a living human. Under the still moonlight, the little alley was more serene than usual. Yi Qingxian stared blankly at the girl in front of him. The dirty kid wore a tattered dress. The original color seemed to be white. The shoulder straps were about to tear, and the dress looked like a pile of rags. Bruises and scars covered her face as if she had been beaten. Her bare legs were covered with wounds. It was as if she had been chased and ran away blindly. Sensing that Yi Qingxian was looking at her, she stubbornly raised her head to stare back at him. Her pupils quivered, but her eyes were full of defiance. The moonlight cast over them so that they glowed like silver. "Hey, cousin." Yi Qingxian glanced at the kid he had just met and forced a smile. "Long time no see." The girl stared at him and opened her mouth, but did not say anything, then closed it tightly. "That kid disappeared. Keep looking. I saw her run over here." Someone banged a metal rod in their hands. "She can't be far." The clamor of voices, a mess of broken sounds, approached from a distance. They were running and searching. Countless people were running around outside, but here, it was still. Old Phil stared at Yi Qingxian impatiently, telling him to shut up and hurry. Yi Qingxian finally understood. When he studied the girl, his eyes had a storm of emotions. "What is your name?" Under his stare, the girl chewed on her lips but refused to speak. Just as Yi Qingxian was about to give up, he heard a soft voice, "Bai Shi. My name is Yi Qingxian." He reached out his hand, "Come with me." The boy held onto her wrist. It was so weak and soft. The girl did not protest, but her trembling revealed her fear. She is but a child, after all, Yi Qingxian thought. There's a white-haired kid just like you. She's a distant relative staying with you. Seaton asked the next day, glancing at him coolly. And she's out of travel money and decided to spend a few days here. Sorry but there really isn't. Where is she? Seaton interrupted. Immense pressure suddenly pressed down on Yi Qingxian. After stuttering, he finally waved his hand, and old Phil excitedly grabbed onto the corner of the girl's shirt, dragging her out. She was no longer dirty. She had showered and treated her wounds, and was wearing Yi Qingxuan's old shirt. The sleeves and pants were rolled up and she looked even smaller in contrast. Her white hair was hidden in a tweed hat. With her head lowered, she looked like a poor family's kid, self-loathing and insignificant. She was silent under Seaton's scrutiny. She looked like an obedient and quiet kid. It was pitiful. Yeah, right. Yi Qingxian thought, he would not take it. His hand was still wounded from when the kid bit him last night. Her eyes were lowered because her gaze was so piercing, as if she wanted to find fault in anyone, at any time. She did not speak because whenever she did, her words were provocative. She looked cute, but her personality was definitely disagreeable. If she was able to do what she wanted, Seaton would have her sent to the White Church's intensive care unit before she could say 3 sentences. Seaton was silent too as he studied her, deep in thought. Beside him, Yi Qingxian nervously wiped his sweat, awaiting the final decision. After a long time, Seaton just said, "She's yours. Look over her." Ha! Yi Qingxian was a little dumbfounded. He thought he would get kicked out. Like you, she'll only get food. No money. And if she doesn't work, then get out. Seaton's voice had no warmth at all. Kid, this isn't a shelter. So remember, this is the last time. Yes, yes. Got it. Yi Qingxian let out a sigh in relief. Wiping his cold sweat, he gave Seaton with a string of praises. Sir, you are so kind and wise. You are glowing upon Avalon. The world will see your power someday, and Anglo will be yours. He kept going until Seaton couldn't take it anymore. At the end, Seaton said she isn't really your cousin, right? Yi Qingxian blanked. I saw old Phil bring her back yesterday. As Seaton turned to leave, he coolly let out the last words, I don't know why those hooligans were looking for her, but don't get into trouble. Yi Qingxuan's heart skipped a beat. Before he could react, Seaton's voice drifted back to him, if you die in the store, it'll be a chore to collect your body. Yi Qingxian was sure that phrase was spoken from his heart. Thinking of this, he sighed and glanced over at Bai Shi. She was sprawled on the counter, watching the clocks curiously. Only now did she look like a kid. A quiet kid. Well, if he could just ignore her hand that was reaching into the counter. Yi Qingxian slapped away her sneaky hand, no stealing. Ha, as if I don't know about your motives. Bai Shi sighed that eyed him. You and that big dark guy want to sell me, right? As she said the words, big dark guy, she glanced around nervously, scared that Seaton would hear. Seeing her like that, Yi Qingxian could not help but sigh. Look at you. All you are is skin and bones. Even if we wanted to sell you, who would even buy you? I don't know about that, but some people are bad. Bai Shi's expression was completely defensive. Hey, you're the bad one. Yi Qingxian thought. You're the one who was going to steal. I was saving you. Saving you. Stealing isn't the problem, but if Seaton found out, you'd be sent to the intensive care unit. For whatever reason, this girl was practically a porcupine. She was the same last night. No matter what Yi Qingxian said in order to get her to shower and change her bandages, it was no use. She kept thinking that Yi Qingxian was going to peep in. Ultimately, Yi Qingxian could only help her lock the attic's door from the inside, remove the ladder and sleep on the ground behind the store's counter. He could hear every sound from upstairs, and had been unable to sleep the entire night. He knew that she wanted to escape, but had nowhere to go. She finally fell asleep at dawn, but not on the bed. She had curled up in the corner with old Phil. She would rather believe old Phil who could not speak instead of any person because old Phil would never hurt her. Thinking of this, Yi Qingxian felt a little bad. What happened that turned her into this? He could only imagine. He knew how hard it was to have no home, so he was able to endure Bai Shi's odd personality. At least she was as annoying as Yi Qingxian had been. Hey! Bai Shi sat on the counter, staring at Yi Qingxian as she munched on his bread. Hearing her unwavering voice, he felt a headache coming. Call me, cousin, and you heard that we need another worker. Mr. Seaton doesn't talk much, but he's a good person. I have to leave someday, so if you work hard, you can stay here. After a pause, he told her, at least, you won't have to live by scamming. Bai Shi was angry, like a cat arching its back. But she did not say anything and just took her anger out on the bread. Her temper did not go away until she had finished all of Yi Qingxuan's breakfast, yet she still continued to glare at him silently. What's wrong? Yi Qingxian could not keep cleaning with her staring at him like that. Bai Shi chewed on her lips, as if debating whether or not to speak. At last, she asked in an unwilling tone, why did you save me? You made me save you. Don't joke. I'd never beg you, even if my life depended on it. Bai Shi was seriously angered. She glared at him, gnashing her teeth. Nothing good has happened ever since I met you. People chase me every day, but now even my money is gone. I don't need your help. She yelled. Does it make you proud to have a little girl thank you? Do you think I'll be grateful that you saved me? You just want to feel proud, right? You really enjoy having a little girl thank you. Let me tell you. No. Way. Yi Qingxian was dumbfounded. He felt defeated. Not because of himself, but because he did not know she thought like this. I never wanted you to thank me, really. A little awkward and helpless, all he could do was sigh. You know, when I was at my lowest point, someone saved me. He gave me food, gave me a shower, and let me stay in a small town until now. He also taught me how to keep living. He thought of the priest's serious expression and could not help but laugh in nostalgia. He told me that a human's language isn't only spoken. Some words can be seen through one's eyes. Bai Shi chewed on her lips. She glared angrily at him without speaking, as if trying to see through his disguise. He told me that when he first saw me, I was standing in the mud. I was angry at the world and my eyes were provocative and piercing. Probably just like you, right? He studied the girl's eyes, seeing the fear and pain hiding deep under the angry, coldness and hate. And those eyes were saying, save me. Chapter 35 Hallucination. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Late at night, in a room filled with smoke, Ghost Hand had been waiting quietly in the Black Octopus pub's secret room. Someone silently walked into the room. He took off his cloak, revealing an elegant long robe from the east. He seemed very old, his hair was mottled gray with black and white flecks. His movements were silent, like a ghost. Lost him again. Mr. Chang sat opposite him. To be honest, I am very disappointed with your work attitude. Unfortunately, this is the city of Avalon. Our work is not always perfect. Ghost Hand shook his head, trying to control his anger. Mr. Chang looked indifferent. Mr. Ghost Hand, before Yunlu is taken over by the rebels, will be delivered whoever we wish to find. If we want his head, then his head will be delivered. If we want his hands, then his hands will be delivered. Anyone who delays the process will have their eyes taken out. If anyone dares to hide him from us, he and his family will pay the price for the mistake. But this is Avalon, and things are not the same as before. Great efforts have been made just to hide your group of people. Ghost Hand frowned. Mr. Shaman does not want to cause any trouble. Do you want this to be noticed by the royal family? It's been almost 4 days. Mr. Chang said quietly, Mr. Ghost Hand, we cannot wait much longer. Mr. Chang, I said I need more time. I've given you time, haven't I? Mr. Chang got up and dispersed like a ghost into the white smoke. In silence, Ghost Hand leaned against the chair. He sucked on his pipe, little by little. The sepia-light pipe broke apart between his teeth. Because of those 2 Eastern kids, Avalon is turning into a mess. He spat out the residue, and crushed the pipe in his palm. And that damn dog. Alright, let's go back. In the carriage outside the pub, Mr. Chang opened his eyes in silence. He had not moved at all from the beginning of his journey until the end. The carriage moved silently. A servant who had just received a message presented a bamboo script to him. Mr. Chang moved his fingers across it, collecting dust on his fingers. You mean, Shaman is looking for another Eastern child? He asked. Yes, also with white hair, and with a dog. Some people saw that kid with the fugitive we are looking for. We do not know who wants him. Mr. Shaman had deemed him more important than our fugitive. Mr. Chang frowned. What is Shaman looking for? Seems to be some kind of box. Dead or alive, just the box. Couldn't find out anything else. In a country of barbarians, the rules are chaotic. This group of barbarians has their own agenda, Chang humphed coldly. The shaman may have credibility, but after all, foreigners can't be relied on. The servant asked, Eunuch Chang, do you mean we have to find another way? There are plenty of people who can help us search in the city of Avalon. Chang contemplated for a moment, then suddenly asked, what happened to the group who is now in the control of Yunlu? They have submitted the credentials and will go into the city soon. Well, Yunlu Qingshu is a wolf with a savage heart. Not only did he seize control of the city of Yunlu, but he also wants to join forces with the barbarians, and claim independence with no respect to his king and father. A princess. Just a fake. No one will be deceived. Chang snapped, give them my orders. Do not betray the trust of His Royal Highness. Bring back the princess. When His Highness takes back Yunlu, and gets rid of the rebel Yunlu Qingshu, he will reward everyone accordingly, and you will all get a cut. Yes, eunuch. The servant hesitated, looking confused, but one thing is unclear to me. Yes. Why bother coming here personally if only for a little girl with the bloodline of dragon? Old Chang fell silent. For a long time he lifted his palm and put it back down, then finally sighed, you have served me for so many years. Today I will teach you a lesson of being by the side of the king. He glanced at his servant who had just escaped death, his eyes like damp, gloomy rotten wood. Follow the rules strictly. Do not cross any lines. That's the trick to living a long life. The more you want to know, the faster you will die. Do you understand what I mean? Understood. The servant was soaked with sweat as if he had been caught in the rain. Then go. Eunuch Chang closed his eyes and rested. Remember, bring her back in one piece, without missing even a single hair. Understood. From that day on, Bai Shi had not spoken to Yi Qingxian. Although she seemed better behaved now, she just did not want to talk to others. Every day after she was done with work, she would quietly sit in the corner. She would stare at the dust on the floor in front of her, but her gaze pierced through the dust as if she was looking at something else. Only old Phil could have a few words with her, but old Phil could not talk, and she would not say anything to a dog. But sometimes when old Phil slept beside her, she would reach out to touch old Phil's hair, carefully and seriously. Old Phil was really a lovable dog. Although it was ugly, it was still much more popular than Yi Qingxian. Unfortunately, that was the way of this world. Hating a person needed countless reasons, but loving a dog did not need any. And in most cases, the dog was much better than a person, for as long as you were good to it, it would not harm you. But Yi Qingxian thought that this could not continue, and that old Phil was his dog. Why do you get to touch him? I can only do that when he is in a good mood, he thought to himself. Once he finished writing the last zero in the account book, he looked up and sighed helplessly. Next to him, Seaton was still silent. This monster-like uncle had been sitting cross-legged behind the counter, struggling to read the fairy tale over and over again. Hearing his sigh, Seaton raised his head and suddenly said, "The boss sent a letter from another town yesterday, asking about you." "He knows about me." Yi Qingxian was surprised. He is a psychopath, but is usually very well informed. Seaton's tone was not very respectful. "He wished you success at the entrance exam, and said he will bring you a gift, for real." I wouldn't get my hopes up. That guy's character and gifts are usually worse than anyone's imagination. The last time he brought me a gift, it was a huge donkey head that could be put on my head, but it was still dripping with blood. He paused, his expression became more unpleasant. "I hate donkeys. Is it really okay for the boss and the staff to have such a bad relationship? If that guy died in a gutter, the world would be a better place." After Seaton finished talking, he shut the book angrily, took some money from the drawer, and went out for a drink. He did not even bother to close the money cabinet. It was just like him since he had a very simple mindset. Yi Qingxian looked at the golden light reflecting from the cabinet. He swallowed his saliva, then shut it with his eyes closed. So much money, he could not help but think. A sneer came from the corner. But when Yi Qingxian looked up, Bai Shi was still in complete silence. He sighed. Bai Shi was squatting in the corner behind the window on the chair she had occupied, using the counter as a dividing line. She and Yi Qingxian were clearly separated. As if they had previously agreed on such terms, they did not talk to one another. The afternoon sunlight came in, obscured by a huge grandfather clock, leaving Bai Shi sitting in a dark corner. Sometimes the dust floating in the air fell into her hands, reflecting her silent eyes. It made people feel pity for her. Yi Qingxuan's hand touched the crystal ball, then sighed. He lowered his head again. You may pity her, but who will pity you, he thought. 4 days. If he counted the nights, it would been 4 days and 5 nights. 3 runes, and all the standard syllables had been memorized by heart, but he could not say them. He had practiced no less than 100,000 times with the ether, but it had not resonated with him even once. Yi Qingxian was desperate. Maybe he was cursed by the ether. Even someone with no talent, with tens of thousands of attempts would at least improve their success rate by 1%. Yi Qingxuan's was still 0, a desperate 0. No matter how many times he tried, whichever rune he practiced was still a 0. From 1 to 2 was very simple, as long as the effort was made to do the addition, but what about from 0 to 1? Yi Qingxian just did not know how. No matter how hard he tried, what had not existed still did not exist. Tall buildings were built from the ground, but what land belonged to him? He silently stared at the ether ball in his hands, not knowing what to do. His heart was gradually filled with sadness. In the silent shop, only countless ticks made a rhythm, monotonous and persistent, constantly jumping from one second to another. In the afternoon sunshine, Yi Qingxian could not help but yawn. He felt quite sleepy. Rubbing his vocal cords with his fingertips, he asked himself if this was all worth it. The ring coiled with a silver string silently reflected the sun, flashing. Musician. He sighed softly, and closed his eyes, feeling the wind blowing from afar. But quickly he realized that this was a shop. The doors were closed. Where had the wind come from? He was not sure when it started. Everything was silent. He opened his eyes and saw the dust on the front of the counter silently blowing off with the wind. Thousands of years had seemed to have passed within a moment. The windows were broken, the glass had become powder. Wooden furniture had rapidly decayed, and cracks spread along the wall. The burning and lonely sunlight shone through the cracks onto Ye's face. He was frightened and wanted to jump up, but felt his body glued to the chair. He could not move. The familiar world quickly faded away from him, and all the familiar people and voices were no longer there. Old Phil was gone, Seaton had disappeared, as well as Bai Shi. He was left alone in this lonely house. He sat in his chair, watching everything decay. Weeds grew from the crack of the floor, and vines climbed up the wall. The busy streets outside disappeared, and were replaced with empty and barren land. The whole world was quiet. Yi Qingxian could only hear the ticking sounds around him. The indigo moon, representing bad omen, was hanging in the sky. Chapter 36. Do you regret it? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Under the indigo wash of the moon, time flew quickly, like a waterfall shooting down thousands of meters. And just like that, the oceans turned to grass fields, and bustling cities became abandoned hills. At the foot of the abandoned hill, tombs jutted from the earth, staggered and reaching towards the edge of the sky. Under the moon's glow, the mismatched tombstones shone coldly. They seemed to come from all over the world, all from different eras. Some were stone tablets and others were wooden stakes. Some were fit for royalty, while others were broken beyond repair, covered with a spider web of cracks. Under every tomb, there was a different lamp of souls enshrined, but more than half of these ancient lamps had gone out. In this silent world, everything was still as death. Yi Qingxian sat on the chair, fearfully gazing at his surroundings before seeing a man facing him, standing among the tombs. The quiet moonlight shone upon him, revealing the silvery patterns of his black robe. The patterns shimmered. They belonged to a heraldry he had seen before, but he could not remember where. A wind blew from far away, his long silver-white hair flowed, like mercury fluttering in the sky. Father. Yi Qingxian subconsciously held his breath the moment he saw that face. Very quickly, he realized that it was not his father's face. It had some of his father's characteristics, but it was not truly him. At times, it looked more like Ye's own reflection, and sometimes looked like neither one of them. Stunned and dazed, Yi realized that the man was studying him too, his eyes unreadable. The man opened his mouth and made sounds. It was as if he was talking, pausing between each word, but Yi Qingxian could not hear his voice clearly. The man repeated himself again and again, and the wind brought back a strange echo. His voice pushed the world to change, rotating the stars, transforming the winds, raising the earth, letting floods loose, but that thunderous voice was still so unclear. Yi Qingxian tried hard to interpret the words, but he could only cry and howl from the pain in his chest. The searing pain spread through his body, and every blood vessel shook madly. It was the pain of being thrown into a pool of lava. Something was filling him, stopping him from listening to the voice, but as the pain intensified, the voice became clearer. The silver-haired man gazed at Yi, repeating himself. Drowning in the flood of pain, Yi Qingshuan's was barely conscious, hoarse screams escaping his body. Finally he felt his body rip into a million pieces, and then he fell into a bottomless pit. Darkness consumed his world, swallowing everything. But just as he fell into the blackness, he heard the man's desolate murmur, "Do you regret it?" His voice was heavy with ancient grief and pain. Ah! Yi Qingxian jolted awake from his nightmare, screaming hoarsely, "'Cause the lone flame of the candle to shudder in the deep night." He had not realized he was stuck in a dream until now. But why was he wrapped in bandages and lying on a bed? His body was still gripped with immense pain. The pain in his dream must have come from real life. But where was it coming from? He was going crazy. Stop screaming, since you're awake. Seaton was focusing on a book at the foot of the bed, sparing him a glance. Holding up the book, he asked, "What does this word mean?" Yi Qingxian needed something to distract him from the pain, so looking at the word became his savior. With some difficulty, he replied, "Repent." This word comes from the written language of the sacred city, and is derived from ancient literature. It means, "I went astray and sinned. Because of this, I repent." Related books and references are Dogmatic Commentary, edited by the sixth generation of popes, and Lingua Franca Dictionary. He could not go on. If his voice had been like sandpaper, now it was like the sound of two pieces of metal rubbing against each other, sharp and piercing. What is wrong with me?" He looked at Seaton in confusion. "Don't know. When I found you, you were bleeding from every pore." Seaton shook his head and pointed at the floor. "The entire floor was red because of you." His eyes became cold again. "Have you thought about how to pay for the floor, and your medical bills? My shop isn't a charity. If you can't pay up, I can introduce you to a doctor who sells organs." "I have to pay." Yi Qingxian almost shot up from the bed. "The floor will be fine after we wash it. Why do you have to change it?" "Sir, can you not be so stingy?" Seaton humphed and did not mention money anymore. "How long was I asleep for?" Yi Qingxian asked with a dry smile. "According to the doctor, you should have kept sleeping and never woke up, or just die from blood loss, but you woke up after 6 hours, so I guess you're okay." Seaton nodded. "Since you're okay, get back to work tomorrow." "Hey, where's your humanity?" "You want humanity. So do I. When the owner comes back, he'll see the floor and think that I can't even look over a shop. I was already pissed at that bastard and you just had to come and make things worse." Seaton continued in a somber voice, "I said before to not give me trouble, but you're just too troublesome. Okay, there's a lot of pressure on you too." Yi Qingxian wanted to cry. No one had it easy in this world. "But no matter what, thank you for saving me," he said quietly. "And I'll find a way to pay you back. Just give me the money." "That's all I put in," a voice said. Seaton rose and revealed the person behind him. "She's the one who saved you." It was Bai Shi. The white-haired girl had been standing there since the beginning, but had been obscured by the burly Seaton. She looked at Yi Qingxian, and unwillingly greeted him. "She found you rolling around on the ground. If you remember anything, you should remember that you also bit her," Seaton stated. "You had extreme blood loss and she was the only one who could give you blood. If not for the fact that Easterners reject foreign blood, I'd think you're a werewolf." With that, Seaton turned to leave. "Rest well. You can have a break tomorrow." Before closing the door, he added, "Remember. Just one day." With the slam of the door, the room sank into overwhelming silence again. Yi Qingxian gazed wordlessly at Bai Shi, but Bai Shi turned her head away from him. Old Phil paced between the two of them in confusion, not sure what happened. Saving someone should be a proud moment, but for some reason, Bai Shi was uncomfortable. Under the flickering candlelight, she lowered her head and toyed with the corner of her shirt, like a student scolded by her teacher. Yi Qingxian opened his mouth many times, but never knew what to say. As the silence continued, Bai Shi finally could not stand the awkwardness any longer. She mumbled, I'm leaving. She turned, wanting to leave immediately, but a voice behind her sounded, thank you. Bai Shi's shoulder trembled, as if she had been startled. Looking down, she stuttered for a while before uttering, oh, as if she was very unwilling. I just called someone over. But your eyes were telling me, let me die. Sorry, I couldn't fulfill your wish. Hearing her words, Yi Qingxuan's features twisted. She was still hung up on that small detail. Children who hold such grudges would be powerful later in life. When he was her age, he was far less of an expert at street survival skills. You don't have to fuss over these details, Yi said. I'm not being fussy. Bai Shi glared at him. Right, I'm just being petty. Yi Qingxian finally had a thread of thought. This girl was stubborn as a mule, and he could only go along with her. Knowing this, things became much easier. Acting like this, she finally seemed like a kid. Are you from the East? Yi Qingxian pushed himself up and rested against the headboard. Bai Shi hesitated before replying honestly, pretty much. Nice. Can you tell me about it? He patted the chair beside the bed, his eyes genuine. He suddenly wanted to know more about the East that his father had always spoke of. Maybe it was that strange dream, or maybe he just wanted someone to talk to. My father got married after coming to Avalon, so I've never been to the East. Everyone thinks that I'm an Easterner, but I don't know anything about it. It's probably, like here. Bai Shi was still unwilling to speak, but she obediently sat onto the chair. But the good thing is that people put free food on the streets. You would not be hungry. Really? Of course. Why would I lie? The little girl rolled her eyes. People once revolted because they didn't like the meat that the emperor handed out. They wanted to eat steamed buns and noodles. In the end, a general poisoned the emperor's meat pie and killed the emperor. It must be hard work to be the emperor of the East. The emperor is just a figurehead. The people that like to eat wheat follow one feudal lord. People who want to eat rice follow another lord. There's one lord that likes to eat potatoes. So everyone that likes sweet potatoes is forced out. Sometimes, the lords will fight over whether they want to eat sweet or savory food. Be nov calm, why do they fight when there's so much food? Yi asked. Doesn't Avalon have people who point and judge because they don't like to eat pork? I haven't seen that before, but you make it sound annoying. Yeah, because they are, Bai Shi replied sassily. See Bai Shi's earnest expression, Yi Qingxian could not help but chuckle. Chapter 37 Strange Kindness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Halfway through the conversation, old Phil came out from under the bed. He leapt up and occupied half of the bed as if he owned it, then lied down and gave a look to signal his two errand boys to scratch his tummy. Bai Shi reached out to scratch old Phil. He was so excited, he started to roll on the floor. Old Phil sneered at Yi Qingxian, giving him a triumphant look that indicated how much he liked Bai Shi's touch, and that he was reconsidering keeping Yi as his errand boy. Yi Qingxian could not help but want to cover his face and sigh. Bai Shi was holding old Phil, scratching its ears carefully. The yellow dog rolled around on her lap with enthusiasm. It was both cheap and ugly. It was almost unbearable to watch for Yi Qingxian. Why is he called Old Phil? Bai Shi asked curiously, grabbing the dog's ears. Well. Yi Qingxian pondered, the explanation is somewhat complicated. Show off, and I told you so much about the East. All right. Yi Qingxian patted his forehead with his bandaged hand. He reluctantly spoke, you know, Old Phil always thought that he was the most powerful in the world, so he always had a tough look. When I first met Old Phil, that had been the way it was. He did not want to do anything, nor did he get close to anyone. All the street thugs called him Fei Wu. Ah. Bai Shi was surprised for a moment. That's the problem. And then, not sure why, but he thought Fei Wu meant king of dogs, so if I called him by other names, he would ignore me. The name Fei Wu is not really nice, right? I had to change it to a nickname. Yi Qingxian sighed. Fortunately, he now thinks that Old Phil sounds more powerful than Fei Wu. Otherwise, if you call out Fei Wu for dinner, he would run to you from across the town. Bai Shi could not help herself, she laughed. But soon she went back to her straight face, like the laughter had never happened. Still a child. Yi Qingxian whispered. Bai Shi looked up. Yi Qingxian smiled and shook his head. Tell me something else. The whole night, Yi Qingxian had lied in his hard bed, covered with bandages, quietly listening to Bai Shi's stories of the East. The little girl was really nothing like a little girl, her tone was not soft, it was full of thorns. She spoke foul words when she got to the exciting part of the stories, even pointed fingers. She was more of a rogue kid than even Victor was. But somehow, he felt better. As long as someone had kept him company, the pain was no longer so unbearable. Even his body, full of wounds, was not so bad anymore. At least he did not need to think of the past, and did not have to think of the future. But in his heart, there was always a voice wondering inside, Yi Qingxian, you cannot become a musician anymore. The inexplicable bleeding had made Yi Qingxian rest in bed for a whole day. Drowsy and sleepy, he thought he had slept for a long time. In his long and broken dreams, there had seemed to be nothing but the broken pieces of the past, and some bizarre and indescribable moments. In those broken dreams, there was always someone whispering, the sound gave him a splitting headache. On the third day, when he finally got out of the bed, it was already noon. Seton did not rush him to work right away, but when he leaned against wall, and tried to walk downstairs step by step, he saw Seton's face twitching behind the counter, with a cigarette in his hand. His eyes were bloodshot. He obviously had reached the edge of a breakdown. This monster-like man was so angry, all of his muscles were trembling with anger, and at his feet, a dictionary was shredded to pieces. What's the matter? Yi Qingxian was confused. Seton pointed at the counter, expressionless. A letter had been delivered by the messenger, and a small box was lying on top. That crumpled letter seemed to be made differently from regular paper, more like something that was written on a piece of excellent quality leather. It was difficult to tear, but had many cracks made by someone. It's to you, read it yourself. Seton grabbed some money from the drawer, slammed the door and went out for drinks. Yi Qingxian grabbed the letter, confused, then he was shocked. It was a letter addressed to him. To my dearest employee Yi. Heard you were ill, I've been worried sick. Although we have not yet met, I have the deepest concerns and worries for your well-being. Perhaps this is what the Easterners meant by fate. Along with the letter is a bottle of medicine, rest well after you take it, and don't worry about the shop. I will reimburse you for all your medical expenses. P.S. Please take care of Seton, as he's not well disciplined. If he does something wrong, please feel free to criticize and punish him, like punishing the tiger that does not obey the ringmaster's command. P.P.S. Please give my regards to the new employee, Miss Bai Shi, and also give me her measurements if it's not too much trouble. I'd like to give her a dress as a present when we meet. Your friend. Hermes. At the end of the letter there was also an emblem to identify the nobility of the sender, but the emblem was particularly strange. It was unlike any that Yi Qingxian had ever seen in the church's pedigree. It was like two snakes wrapped on a strange cane. The letter was filled with warmth and kindness. Other than the fact that it had almost blown Seton away, you could almost see a noble gentleman who was kind, polite, and generous, who worried about Yi with sincerity. He also had a same name as a famous artist from 100 years ago. The special concern from the boss had given Yi Qingxian a chill. He looked at Bai Shi, this is from the boss. Bai Shi's expression was also odd. Yes. He wants your measurements. Tell him to go to hell. Bai Shi answered like a sharp slap, making Yi Qingxian give up the idea of writing a reply. Yi Qingxian picked up the small box on the cupboard, and was startled after he opened it. What is this? In the wooden box, there was a slender test tube buried in thick cotton pads, filled with rose-red liquid, reflecting a magnificent light. Bai Shi was stunned when she saw the tube. She gave Yi Qingxian a strange look. Hey, do you think the boss fancies you? Fancy. Yes, fancy. Bai Shi lifted her eyebrows, her expression was odd. I heard that many old ladies like fresh young boys. What are you talking about? I haven't even met the owner yet. And if you don't want to say my name, you can call me cousin, not just, hey, like you were my creditor. Want to take advantage of me? No way. Bai Shi sneered at him. This is a cure, made by the church, excellent for treating external wounds. The price is almost as expensive as a brick of black gold. Her last sentence had Yi Qingxuan's hands shaking. He stared at the test tube in his hands. That expensive. In addition to their respective issued currencies, countries would trade with each other using a common currency of black gold, made by the church. Presently, Anglo's currency had been continuously declining, so that the price of the black gold had continuously jumped up. Roughly, one test tube would be over 60,000 pounds. Yi Qingxian felt depressed. How expensive. Couldn't he have just given me the money? I'd drink this as soon as possible if I were you. This thing loses its effect 10 minutes after exposure to the sun. Bai Shi's words had awakened Yi Qingxian, so he quickly pulled out the stopper, and poured the liquid into his mouth. When he was done, he smacked his lips, seemingly not tasting everything. But soon he felt an extreme coldness spread inside his body. It was like the moment of an explosion of freezing bombs. He was dizzy, and almost fell to the ground, but quickly his senses came back. The strong pain in his body had rapidly depleted, almost as if they were not even there. So effective. He muttered, feeling like the world was shaking. There are side effects, and you probably won't have any strength for the rest of the afternoon. And there was a trace of mandala inside the drug. Bai Shi had a deceitful look on her face. Her smile was sweet and innocent. Cousin, let's play cards. Play cards. Yi Qingxian tried to suppress the feeling of dizziness. What are you playing at? Every time you call me cousin, it's nothing good. Why, a small amount of gambling is entertaining. I'm concerned for you. Bai Shi took a pair of cards out of nowhere, then shuffled skillfully. We can stick white paper on the face instead of playing for money. Want to warm up with a 5-card draw. Yi Qingxian could not help but sigh. Very skillful shuffling. You made money with this, didn't you? Skills to make a living, of course. How about I won't cheat? Bai Shi smiled harmlessly, exceptionally sweet. Come on cousin, let's play. Can I not play? It counts as a loss if you don't play. Yi Qingxian sighed and picked up the cards, but when he was shuffling, he saw the strange picture on the cards. What is this? Unlike the other cards with only pictures on the king and queen cards, this deck had own pictures on cards 1 through 10. It seemed to be someone from a strange story, but the style was extremely gloomy, making people shudder. This deck was the Avalon's legendary commemorative edition. On the cover was the most famous legend of Avalon. It was said to be very popular. Legend. Yi Qingxian seemed confused. When did that happen? He picked one up randomly and asked, what is this? The card was painted with an old man wearing a feather crown. His hand was holding a broken heart, his eyes gloomy. It is said that he was the controller of all of Avalon. He hid behind the curtain, and controlled the underground world. He sounded like a very powerful man, but many people have said there was no such person. And others said that they had seen him, but no one could describe what he looked like. People who had met him called him shaman, and when shaman issued an order, no one dared to oppose. Shaman. Yi Qingxian thought the name sounded familiar, like he had heard it somewhere before. Chapter 38 The Marketplace Legend. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That was the shaman. What about this one? Yi Qingxian flipped over the second card. On this card was a man wearing a hat. His golden locks reached his waist, and he stood on a pile of gold, silver, and wealth. Jewels fell from his hands like sand. The trader. Apparently, you can buy anything from him as long as you have money. Even the impossible is possible with him. She lowered her voice. Some people also say that Anglo's throne was bought from him by King Arthur with his treasured sword. How is that possible? Yi Qingxian laughed. Even if it is true, he can't live this long, right? You never know. If he really does have everything, it wouldn't be weird if he has the secret to immortality. That kind of makes sense. Yi Qingxian flipped another card. What is this? The card's background was blood red. Within the broken and bodiless limbs, there seemed to be a shadow. Everything was bloody and dark. Oh, that is the killer. He has disappeared now, but apparently he killed for money and he took every type of job, even the assassinations of high officials. When he's in action, he leaves no witnesses alive. Anyone who sees him will get their heads yanked off. Someone gave him the nickname Bloody Butcher because the scene he leaves behind is like a slaughterhouse. The white wraiths in the church, the soul eater, the psychotic killer who massacred in the deep night, the Ripper, the women who kidnapped children to feed devils, Haridi, the living dead who wandered in the graveyard and feasted on fresh blood, the vampires, the debt collector who could take souls with his hand, the ghost hand, the black shadow that flew across the sky at midnight, the phantom carriage. These were Avalon's top 10 legends. Wait, but there's only 9, Yi Qingxian counted with his fingers and realized that there truly was only 9. Oh, there's another one. At the mention of this, the excited Baishi suddenly lost all interest. She revealed the last card. On this card was the silhouette of the clock tower at midnight. In the darkness, there was something squirming and running by. This is the last legend. It's the naked man who runs through the streets of Avalon at midnight. Yi Qingxian was instantly awake. You look funny. Are you okay? I'm scared. He was too embarrassed to say that he had seen this crazy man before. The first 9 of the top 10 Avalonian legends were so powerful and impressive, but this last one was just wretched. Running around nude while singing at midnight. A crazy man with bird-nest hair. What was wrong with the aesthetic standards of the Avalonian people? What's the last ghost card? Yi Qingxian looked at the 2 ghost cards. But rather than a clown, there were strange and ferocious buildings. The black card had a high tower. But when reflected into the water, the tower turned into a pile of bones. It stretched endlessly, going towards hell. The bloody shadow. Baishi said, legend says that this road is hidden inside Avalon. It leads straight to the backside of Avalon. If you walk down it, you'll see the city's true appearance. Then what about the red one? The red card in his hand depicted a large but abandoned city. It was covered with cobwebs and scorch marks. The giant city was choked with dust, as if it was already dead. This is the Avalon in the legends. Baishi paused and added, the real Avalon. It had been 300 years since the end of the Dark Ages. 270 years ago, King Arthur refused the holy name given by the sacred city. He came here instead and created Sacred Anglo's first city. This was the earliest legend of Avalon. No longer did people know what this place had been before that. Some scholars dug through the remains of the ancient books and came up with this strange conclusion. 300 years ago, Avalon was 600 meters below sea level. This meant that the island was supposed to be sleeping at the bottom of the ocean. But according to the ether levels of ancient Avalonian buildings, they have existed for more than 1,000 years. The scholars did not know what to do with the contradicting information. In the end, this debate could only be buried under the countless other research. But this legend had been passed on until now, becoming more and more detailed. Some said that Avalon was originally a city controlled by Satan. It lay at the bottom of the ocean for eternity. It floated up during the War of Glory, and the world was about to be destroyed. But then Hyakum was seriously injured and left its lair. But its secret was still hidden inside the city. Others said that this was the Burgundians' conspiracy. But some also support the more recent continental drift theory, believing that Avalon was an island that floated from elsewhere. None of these are reliable. Avalonians have too much time on their hands. Yi Qingxian dismissed these theories. Yeah. Let's just play cards. Baishi shuffled the cards, her features dancing. I'll go easy on you for the first round, and we'll start small. $20 for the first round. His face expressionless, Yi Qingxian reached over and took out the card she hid inside her sleeve. I said before, you can't cheat. Half an hour later, Yi Qingxian was getting drowsier and it was hard to focus. It felt like he had a hangover, like alcohol was playing with him, making him overexcited, and then taking away self-control. Thankfully, he could still think. Thankfully. Okay. Hand over the money. He showed his card, and stretched out his palm with a smile. Or else I'm going to put on a strip of paper. There was only complete and utter silence. Past the tick-tock-tocks, one could only hear Baishi's angry pants. The strips of paper all over her face moved as she breathed, like the legendary Wendigo. In 30 minutes, she had already lost her salary for the next 3 years, if she was going to get any salary. You told me, this is your third time playing flush. Baishi gritted her teeth. This is how someone plays for the third time. This really is my third time. Yi Qingxian yawned and answered drowsily, the first time, I didn't understand the rules and lost 1 month's salary. The second time, I won all their pants. From then on, no one wanted to play with me anymore. They all say, that I cheat. You said we're not allowed to cheat. Baishi pounded on the table and got into his face. Where did you hide the poker? Tell the truth. Or else I'm going to beat you up while you still can't fight back. I didn't lie. I'd never cheat. Yi Qingxian opened his arms and let the girl search him. The cards that he had shuffled fell from his hands, scattering like snow. 50.4 poker cards, no more, no less. The rolled-up sleeves, short nails, spread apart fingers, under the table, there were no signs of cheating anywhere. Baishi searched Yi Qingxuan's pockets repeatedly but came up with nothing. I told you I won't cheat. Feeling heavy, Yi Qingxian finally could not resist the urge of sleep and sprawled onto the table. Before he fell asleep, he seemed to remember something and laughed lightly, but I can memorize cards. Thanks for coming with me to deliver the goods. It's not like I know the way. The next day, Yi Qingxian could finally walk, albeit with a cane. He limped down the road. Beside him, Baishi, a head shorter than him, carried the case in her arms. She walked casually, glancing around. As if she were self-conscious about her white hair, she had stuffed her hair under her hat. She was still wearing Yi Qingxuan's clothes from before, and looked like a typical street kid. But it really took a lot of effort for Mr. Seton to get this business deal. You think too much. This is just an ornamental clock that they asked the boss to send over from Burgundy. We're just delivering it. The corner of Baishi's lips curled. If they didn't send a letter asking, Seton probably would have thrown it into the trash. Fine. The store will probably close someday, thanks to him, Yi Qingxian muttered, a bit worried. Why are you sighing? This has nothing to do with you. Baishi rolled her eyes. Her pupils rolled around twice, and another bad idea popped into her head. Hey, cousin, how much do you think this clock is worth? It's not vintage, but the signature says it was created by a very famous Burgundian artisan. It's hard to estimate its market value. But the newest watch core, gold and silver inside, are expensive. Based off of the black market's rule of raising the price 30%, it's probably around 60,000. Yi Qingxian counted on his fingers and nodded at the end. If it's someone who knows the trade, it can sell for up to 100,000. Bai Shi was dumbfounded, not just because of the price, but also because of Yi Qingxuan's words. How do you know all this? There are books all over the store. You can read them too. Yi Qingxian sighed that eyed her and knocked her head. Don't get any silly ideas. Seton wasn't joking when he said he sends troublesome people to the hospital. Hey, I didn't even say anything. Nothing good comes when you call me cousin. And I bet you were thinking about running off with that thing, right? Humph. Bai Shi did not say anything else, but it was clear she had not given up yet. On my third day here, there was a thief. Seton didn't say anything, but broke the thief's arm that afternoon, and brought everything back to the store. His muscles are there for a reason. Don't think that he's harmless just because he sits and reads all day. Yi Qingxian kept talking until the girl had goosebumps all over. This was the fourth time he stopped Bai Shi from breaking the law today. What joy, as if. This girl was too far gone if she wanted to break the law 4 times in one day. Other than old Phil's dog food, there probably was not a thing she did not want to steal. Bai Shi poked curiously into the crowd, as if she was listening to the musicians on the street. The dark-skinned musician sat cross-legged on a ragged cloth, playing a chong flute. This instrument was rare, and its beautiful music caused those passing by to nod and toss coins into the box in front of him. Bai Shi glanced at the box filled with copper coins, about to drool. Yi Qingxian moved to stop her, but thankfully something else happened that caught everyone's attention. Far away, a high-pitched trumpet sounded. A clamor traveled from the distance. Chapter 39 Taiyi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The first sound was from 16 high-pitched trumpets. Dressed in crimson robes, the guards stood atop the city wall. They held up trumpets almost the size of themselves, took a deep breath, and blew strongly to welcome the important guests. Outside Midtown's 6th ring of city walls, a long and mighty procession entered this large city. The bishop's door opened only when the emperor arrived. Now, it opened slowly under the golden sun. The heavy city gates creaked, silencing the commotion of the crowd. Quickly, soldiers clad in golden armor, holding ceremonial halberds and copper scepters filed into a line, then entered the foreign city. The first was the soldier wielding a halberd. Following him were the ritual officials holding all sorts of offerings and gifts. Behind them was the long procession. 6 stallions were required to pull large carts filled with silk, spices and porcelain from the east. With their black hair spun into buns of the high-ranking, the female officials scattered holy water and petals onto the street. Their buns looked like that of fairies, and these eastern faces smiled standard smiles, opening up the road for the golden carriage behind them. 8 pure white stallions pulled a gold carriage through the road. The 4 corners of the carriage were decorated with heaters in the shape of mythical creatures. The heaters were filled with incense, and milk and herbs, emanating a heavy scent. The aroma spread through the crowd with the breeze, casting everyone into a luxurious dream. The bustling masses filled the 2 sides of the road, excitedly cheering and screaming. They waved towards the large golden carriage, trying to peek past the layers of silk to see who the thin silhouette really was. After resting for 7 days, Princess Yunlu from the east has finally arrived in the city. Rumored to be only 16 years old but already the beauty of the nation, the princess sat primly in her carriage. Covered by thin silk and a brocade, the people could only see a silhouette. And yet, they could not look away. The thousands of people cheered and screamed at either side of her, yet she did not move, coldly accepting the cheers from this foreign city as if she could not hear them. But the people became more and more curious. How beautiful must she be to have such a gorgeous procession? The mighty carriage procession went down the royal road, slowly and steadily passing through each city gate and street, all the way to the palace at the top of the city. 5 city gates opened one after another, welcoming the foreign princess into the embrace of Avalon. At the third ring, no one cheered more loudly than Yi Qingxian, who had rushed over after hearing the news. He leaned on his cane in the corner. Beside him was a confused Bai Shi. She's just a princess. It doesn't have to be this pompous. Dumbfounded and tongue-tied, Yi Qingxian watched as the armor-clad soldiers walked by, and the mighty procession marched towards the peak of the mountain city. 300 followers and 20 carriages, that's not much. The corners of Bai Shi's lips curled as she looked at the country bumpkin next to her. In the east, tens of thousands would accompany the emperor when he patrolled. The streets were closed 3 days before to be cleaned and covered in yellow brocade. When the emperor passed, there were fires on the side to burn spices. The entire city was filled with this scent, like a wonderland. After learning so many formulas, Yi Qingxian tried calculating how much everything would cost. He realized that he did not have enough brain power, and could only say, Easterners are so rich. The golden carriage finally passed by him. Under the burning sun, the silk in the window danced, and the carriage seemed to melt into the sun. It reflected dazzling colors, so bright one could not even open his eyes. Yi Qingxian squinted, watching the carriages still in the distance. A breeze blew from the ocean, lifting the silk and brocade embroidered with hundreds of birds. The sight was beautiful, like a fantasy. And the layers of silk finally had an opening. Inside the carriage, one could still only see a backside. The white-haired girl clad in a robe was looking up at the sky. As if sensing the eyes of the crowd, she spared them a glance. It was fleeting, but her eyes were like mist. It was untouchable and indescribably beautiful. The crowd became even more excited, and everyone tried to push to the front. They called for the princess, trying to see her face clearly. But she had already looked away and would not turn back. Look, look. Yi Qingxian pulled at Bai Shi. She's pretty. Bai Shi could not help but roll her eyes. Yeah, every generation of her family is pretty. She has a good lineage. If she wasn't pretty, she'll be a disgrace to her ancestors. Are you sure? Obviously. If I'm rich and powerful, of course I'd pick someone pretty to marry. And marry them in batches. Bai Shi gestured with her thumb. I'd need those that look graceful even when they're picking their noses. That's disgusting. Ha. The girl sighed that eyed him. I mean you have a good dream, and it should be encouraged. Yi Qingxian shook his head, but just as he was ready to leave, he took another glance by curious coincidence. Under the ceremonial music, people crowded the carriage, tossing flowers and cheering. But the silent girl sat kneeling behind the silk, probably smiling demurely. Paired with fresh flowers, silk, jewels, gold and silver, everything was so beautiful. But she looks a little sad, he murmured. Ha! Bai Shi glanced at him. Nothing. Smiling, Yi Qingxian said, let's go. As those words left his mouth, he suddenly halted as the world spun. In the dizziness, he heard a low sound, something like water boiling. It rose over the crowd and the road. The sound flowed like water, and the empty echo carried with it a bursting noise. Once again, he felt the pain that made him want to vomit, as if he returned to the battle between Wolf Flute and the Rain Artist. The crowd's cheers were snuffed and they stumbled backwards, unable to stand still. Some people gazed around in confusion, but saw nothing. Only the musician in the corner of the street was still lightly playing his bamboo flute. The flute melody hung in the air. No, no. Yi Qingxian pushed himself up using the wall, and grabbed the dazed Bai Shi into his arms. He finally understood. Bai Shi, run. This is This was a pre-planned attack. Boom. Before he could finish, there was the sound of a water dam bursting. The bamboo flute was piercing, like metal shooting straight into the sky. The 16 stone gargoyles from the city walls echoed in the vortex. Then they burst into countless shards, flying through the air. Green-black light shot through like a waterfall. The light was like water, collecting in the air. Reflecting the sunlight, it was dazzling. But the pungent smell covered the early fragrances. And it was not water. It was an endless storm of steel sand. 6 turrets of steel sand with piercing tips flew in the air, radiating green-black light. The tide of sand followed the sewers and flooded onto the road. It was such an angry current, but it looked so calm, like a stream in the sky. The green-black light was like a mirror, reflecting the flowers, decorations, and the people's fearful expressions. Quickly, the beating notes hit upon the steel river. And so it shattered, and the countless sand particles flew apart, transforming. The blinding sunlight rolled down its smooth surface, so dazzling that it forced the people to shut their eyes. As countless people fell to the ground, writhing in pain, the musician in the corner finally stood up. His bare feet stepped onto the bustling street, each step following the rhythm of his flute. The flute controlled the changes of the steel sand until they finally formed something. As mournful shouts cut through the air, 1,000 pairs of wings spread under the sun. They were countless steel cranes. The hundreds of green-black cranes born from the steel sand screamed over the music of the flute. Like thousands of trembling blades, they resonated with all the metal objects. And then, the steel cranes fell. They broke apart from the tide, but regrouped into a new tide. The giant mass of cranes rushed toward the earth. As their wings brushed against each other, sparks turned to fire. As they rushed downward, their screams were like the sound of the grim reaper. Rather than stopping them, the strong wind only helped push them forward. In the wind, the embroidered flags were lifted and torn. White shreds fluttered to the ground like butterflies. The angry wind swept down the princess's crown. Her mercury-like white hair escaped from its confines, dancing in the air. Her luxurious robe was lifted, like dissipating mist. There was an unbearable beauty in that fleeting moment. But beauty always had to be destroyed. The flaming cranes attacked, swarming onto the girl. In futile resistance, she raised her pale wrist, as if wanting to stop the attack with her arm. It was laughable, like a praying mantis trying to stop a carriage. But at that moment, Yi Qingxian heard Bai Shi murmur in his arms, "Tai." Bai Shi covered his ears in fear, "Don't listen." But Yi Qingxian could not hear any more. Because in that moment, all sound disappeared. He saw Princess Yunlu raise her palm. But rather than opening it, she pressed her thumb and forefinger together, and snapped. Immediately, the world started shaking. Like jade hitting against golden chimes, everything started roaring. The terrifying ripple spread from her fingertips. It joined in the middle and shot up into the sky. The ripple broke the steel crane's wings and shattered their claws. They were so strong and unyielding, but the metal transformed, warped, turned to powder under the weight of the water. There were thousands of steel cranes, thus thousands of cracking noises sounded. When they sounded in unison, it was like countless pieces of glass shattered. The fine sand could no longer stay together, and they melted, evaporated. They rose to the sky, and were blown deep into the ocean by the sudden hurricane. The quake seemed to enter one's body, twisting their organs, instantly defeating them. Crimson blood spurting from their noses, including the musician. The bamboo flute was reduced to dust in the wind. Following that were his hands. He knelt onto the ground, was pushed down and captured by armor-clad soldiers. "Witch! You deserve to die." He raised his head, crying tears of blood, trying to tear apart the silent girl sitting inside the carriage. "I can't kill you today, but I will not rest. You, Yunlu bastard, I'll boil your meat and rip your skin." Karma will find Yunlu Qingshu and you someday. Karma. He howled, screaming over and over about karma until his body went rigid and collapsed, never breathing again. This was the musician using the sound of heart. He destroyed his heart and brain from the inside, refusing to be taken captive by the enemy. With his fall, the sudden attack was finally over. In the chaos, Yi Qingxian was finally clear-headed again. He gasped for breath, sweat rolling down his cheeks. With Bai Shi covering his ears, he was a bit better than the others. But the girl in his arms was deathly pale. Yi Qingxian could feel Bai Shi trembling, almost collapsing. She had always been weak. But after all that, even if Yi Qingxian had protected her, she would no longer be able to stand. "Let's go," she whispered with her head lowered. "I don't want to be here anymore." "Okay." Yi Qingxian nodded, leaned onto his cane, and led her away. In the chaos, everyone ran, trying to escape in confusion. The originally grand welcome ceremony was reduced to a mess. But still, Princess Yunlu sat primly on her grand carriage. Her seat was still beautiful, still gorgeous, as if it was part of another world and nothing could disturb her. The assassination fell past her like dust. And like dust, there was nothing to care about. Amongst the crowd, she watched, almost subconsciously, the white-haired youth and the girl in his arms. Chapter 40 Bloodline of the Dragon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was a quiet dusk, the setting sun lulled the people to sleep. At the Avalon Pier, a boat rested at the port, but rarely did passengers come down. At the front of this empty pier there was a monstrous and burly man. He sat on a bench, studiously reading a wrinkled pamphlet. Bang! A giant suitcase, almost half the size of him, fell in front of him. It landed with a heavy thud, causing dust to fly into the air. The newcomer, looking around curiously, did not match his giant suitcase at all. The youth was clad in a pure white robe, but his skin was even paler. He was feminine, yet handsome and tender. His golden hair hung to his waist and was tied behind his back. The silver hair accessories, and his flowing golden locks shone under the sun, radiating beauty and grace. On his arm was a tattoo of sorts. The intertwined twin snakes were strange yet elegant. This old place is still the same. This youthful-looking man sat down on his suitcase and poked the burly man with his cane. "Hey, Seton. You're so cold. Won't you greet me?" Seton raised his head and gazed coolly. After a long time, he finally forced out, "Hey, why aren't you dead yet?" "Friend, you make me so sad," the blonde shook his head, sighing. "I even bought a collar for you so you can be more obedient. How can you treat me like this?" Crack. The bench groaned as Seton glared at the blonde kid, his joints cracking and popping. "Ah, never mind. You still get angry so easily. Let's change the topic." The youth sighed and then looked side to side impatiently. "Where are my two cute new workers? Have they eaten well? Rested well? Became nice and plump? Come on, let me see the boy full of secrets, and the equally mysterious girl." He opened his arms excitedly. "I don't care who goes, but someone go tell them. Tell them that their amazing, caring, kind, handsome, and beautiful boss, the respected Sir Hermes, has returned." They were finally done delivering goods at dusk. Yi Qingxian sat in a corner of the fountain square, sunbathing lazily. His cane was in Bai Shi's curious hands. Under the waning sun, Yi Qingxian took out the ether ball. Out of habit, he sang some notes, but there was no response as usual. "You're still trying." Bai Shi understood after seeing the ether ball in his hands. "It's impossible for you. The most common notes are all in the upper or lower range. Your range can't reach those, and you can't even sense the ether, right?" Bai Shi sighed, "But you couldn't get lucky even once during all those tries. How unlucky are you? I can't help it. Maybe I'm just unfortunate. Yi Qingxian shrugged, but his mind went back to the terrifying afternoon, the thousands of steel cranes shining in the sky and the immense power from Princess Yunlu's small movement. Tai. He suddenly remembered this word, and looked up at Bai Shi. You said, Tai, at noon. What does it mean? Ha. Bai Shi's face was full of confusion. What Tai? I heard it. Yi Qingxuan's lip curled. Stop acting dumb. You said it when Princess Yunlu almost got assassinated. Tai. Oh, that, Bai Shi finally nodded after thinking for a long time. I meant to say, talent. Natural-born talent. Talent is just a wide vocal range or agile moves at most. If this is talent, then you're saying the princess was this powerful at birth. That's why it's talent, true talent, Bai Shi said. Talent isn't a voice, looks, or a sixth finger on your right hand. It's something predetermined. You get it when you're in the womb, or even earlier. It's already determined when your ancestors made the vow. I don't get it. Are you sure you're saying something humans can understand? Bai Shi glanced at him helplessly and sighed, are you sure you have Eastern lineage? Yi Qingxian pointed at his hair. I thought this was obvious. Let me just ask you one thing. Did you know that in the East, many people have black hair? Bai Shi prodded Yi Qingxian. Ha! Yi Qingxuan's entire worldview was flipped and thrown out the window. Isn't it white? White hair is rare in the East. There's maybe 1 per 1,000 people. You saw during the afternoon, right? Yunlu's procession had many black-haired female officials. In the East, it's a celebratory event to have a white-haired baby. It's a sign of atavism, you're born with characteristics of your ancestors. And you have the potential to become a musician. This type of person is known as Deva. Every white-haired child is accepted by the Imperial Academy to study as a musician. But the success rate is probably around 30%. Yi Qingxian had a headache. He thought he had heard Bai Shi wrong. Wait, you said that out of 3 white-haired people, only 1 can become a musician. That's right. What's the ratio in Anglo? 1,000 to 1. After thinking for a moment, Yi Qingxian shook his head, not even. Yeah, that's why it's rare. Bai Shi toyed with her own hair, her face full of pride. In Eastern legends, people come from the sky. The legends say, before the Dark Ages, everyone had the robes, beauty, white hair, and good wine of the Deva. Life was perfect and unbelievable. But later, the Deva became tainted and fell to earth. Some began to forget their past and their hair gradually turned black in the mundane world. Only the elite still have their white hair. To protect their lineage, they can't marry others. It's that strict. Yi Qingxian stuttered, does it work? Don't know. It's been a few hundred years and many families have disappeared because of war and natural disasters. Other than the rare occasion of atavism, there are only 9 pureblood families. They're known as the Dragon Bloodline 9. Bai Shi continued, more than 2/3 of all Eastern musicians are from these 9 families. They have a lot of secrets and techniques. Apparently, they're all protected by artifacts that bless their families. Every descendant must be tested by the artifact in the ancestral hall when they come of age. If they pass, they'll be enlightened. Maybe mysterious knowledge or sheet music appears in their minds. Or maybe it's the even more treasured, talent. It's a gift to the lineage and their eternal shackles. So is Tai, the Princess Yunlu's talent? Yi Qingxian asked. Bai Shi chanted quietly, an auspicious day, the pleased soldier and emperor, stroked the long sword and jade earring, tinkling gems and glittering jewels, of all the talents, Tai is the most powerful one. It means dominance. This type of talent is known as the scepter in the West. Only high-ranking musicians can have this power. You know a lot. Yi looked at Bai Shi strangely. Hey, cousin, are you a dragon bloodline girl who ran away from home? Cousin, you have such a creative imagination. Bai Shi gazed at him with disdain. But there's only one elite family with the surname Bai in the East, okay? It's the regent who stole the country's power 30 years ago, Bai Heng. But the rest of the family died when he caused all that trouble. Saying this, she gestured with her pinky finger like a hooligan. If I'm his daughter, all I have to do is point with my finger, and everyone would rush over to beat up that Princess Yunlu. I suddenly feel that it's a blessing to the citizens that you aren't a princess. A sharp pain suddenly came from the back of Yi Qingshuan's head. Bai Shi had pulled out a strand of his hair. She also pulled out one of her own and put them together, comparing the two. Hey, what are you doing? Nothing, just making sure. Bai Shi waved him away, focusing on the two strands of white hair, making noises of surprise. If one looked closely, it was clear that their hair was different. While Bai Shi's hair was a pure silver white, Yi Qingshuan's hair had a light shade of golden yellow flowing through it. It was easy to miss if one did not pay attention. A mixed blood's white hair, it's incredible, no matter what. Is it really weird? Yi Qingshan asked. I already told you. Only pure bloods can have white hair. I've never heard of a mix with white hair. The first time I saw you, I thought you dyed your hair. Even if they're both Easterners, if a Deva and commoner married, their children would lose the white hair gene. How powerful must your father's lineage be? She paused, her expression twisting into shock. Are you the bastard child of some big elite family? Your imagination is too wild. Yi Qingshan knocked the side of her head, interrupting her. My father was an average musician. My mother wasn't anyone special either. Let's end this topic here. What a pity, Bai Shi murmured. If you're a pure blood, then you can become a musician, even if you're mute. Yi Qingshan stayed silent for a long time before suddenly chuckling. What's pitiable about things like this? He paused then said, okay, let's go. We should head back. Yi Qingshan shook his head. Pushing aside the memories of the past, he stood up. Oh, Bai Shi replied quietly. She was not very willing. It was rare to be out, and she had not had enough fun yet. Seeing her unwillingness, Yi Qingshan laughed. Maybe he could bring her outside more often if they had more delivery or procuring chores. Just as they turned to leave, an ancient voice sounded behind them.